I'd like to welcome everybody again to the History of the Commission project. And today we're very happy and very glad to be interviewing Jerry English, who was a former chairwoman of our commission. Mrs. English was a state senator and counsel to the state senate at one point, was counsel to Governor Brendan Byrne, was a commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection, commissioner on the Port Authority, New Jersey and New York, and is still associated, I believe, with the law firm of Lindaberry, McCormick, Easterbrook, and Cooper.
That's correct.
And I can't go into the many organizations that you've been a part of, but I will mention the fact that you've are part of the Women's Political Caucus in New Jersey, and of course, as I said, is a former chairwoman of the Election Law Enforcement Commission from 2004 to 2010. Now, I just want to start off with talking about a little bit about your time with Governor Byrne. And I know during that time you oversaw the extension of the gubernatorial public financing program to the primary. You know, initially in 1977, under Governor Byrne, the gubernatorial public finance program was enacted, but it was only covered the general election during that first election. But in 1981, it was extended to the primary as well, as a major accomplishment, obviously, by the administration and by yourself being involved with it. I'd just like to ask you, would you just discuss the public financing program a little bit and how important it is to the state of New Jersey?
Well, I think it was from the very top. This was a passion of Governor Byrne's. But he really always believed that it was important for anyone who aspired to be governor to be able to do so, but was very realistic about that takes money, that takes funds, and he thought that having a public financing vehicle would be the way to do that. With matching funds, you know, there would be you'd have to be credible, that you would have some backing, and then you would be matching funds up to a certain point, and that would be capped. It would also require that everyone that took those kinds of funds, it's in the general and eventually for the primaries rather, and then for the general, that they submit to a public debate schedule. The point of public participation in being able to see very good members of the press do that. One of our commissioners, you'll recall, Susan Leatherman, who was a predecessor of mine, was the chair of the American Association of Women.
League of Women Voters. Yeah.
For Women, League of Women Voters. Thank you. And so she did the national debates. I know that was a great contribution to the whole picture for the commission, to see what is involved, who's involved, the roles of the campaigns, the staff interaction being pretty minimal. Unless, of course, people wanted the staff to be right in there. But a very, very important public view. By that time, the campaigns had pretty much figured out what they were for. So I think I gave you the background. But I don't think that when he came up with this passion of his, that he ever had any idea that this commission, the New Jersey Commission, would become a national leader
Absolutely, yeah.
for years and years and years, and that conventions were taking place. Other states would be coming in with their own commissions or deciding that they wanted to do this in the public interest. And so your predecessors and you have maintained this leadership. And so I think that's the thing that, to bring it to what I think about it, is extraordinary. You've also been through every kind of attempt to show what how to decimate an independent agency. It can either be done because you don't have sufficient members, that they are blocked politically. You end up with one commissioner all by himself without the other statutorily elected people being there, or appointed people. And the staff, this is when I get really serious now. A professional staff that have been part of the fabric of this, the success of this commission, is a tribute to all of the executive directors that were before you, all the commissioners that were before me and who have subsequently served. And the other part that I don't want to leave out is the respect that the commission has had in the legislature, wanting to respond, realizing that they're being regulated. I mean, you know, they have to file those forms.
That's right.
They have to. And our enforcement staff is there to make sure that the process is as fair as it can be. And when things get out of line, then the commission probably never thought that it would have to recommend to the Attorney General of the state that he commence a criminal proceeding, because the jurisdiction of the commission is only civil. And so that did happen, and a very, very large fine imposed. That tends to also inform all voters and all citizens that the process is important, and enforcement is absolutely required. And so the enforcement staff, and now remind me, how many elections do you cover every year?
Well, that's a really good question, because, you know, we have, as a commission, as you know, we have the widest jurisdiction of any commission of its type in the nation. I mean, not only do we cover all the elections from the local level, all the way down to fire district, to school board, to your county and municipal elections, your state Senate and Assembly elections, your gubernatorial elections. But then in addition to that, we regulate lobbyists, and we regulate the pay-to-play law, and the gubernatorial public financing program that you were talking about. So we have even a wider jurisdiction than the Federal Election Commission. So, you know, that's, and we only, and you know, you ask a very good question, because we only have, what is it, 7 investigators and you know, about 9 attorneys for the entire state. So it is a job that we all take very seriously, and you know, one that is can be very difficult to be able to pursue to the greatest extent that we want to, because of the staffing situation.
Well, not only that, but from the very beginning, as I say, the status of the people who serve as private citizens, who have been alumni,
Right.
Starting right off with one of the justices of the Supreme Court that had just retired, and then moving on to somebody that had been the U.S. attorney, and then became the head of Homeland Security, Mike Chertoff. And then a colleague that served with me, Justice Tim Pone, who is just being honored right now by the New Jersey Bar Association. All of these people brought a certain kind of spotlight. But then we had our judges who had retired, Judge Saunders, and for instance, Larry, who was an old colleague of mine, and I think he was the only one that was elected out of the 3rd Ward in Westfield as a Democrat.
Well, let me jump in there because I was going to ask this question anyway. How was it serving with Amos Saunders and Al Burstein? I mean, they were two of the, we've had all great commissioners, but they were, top flight as well.
Joe Donahue would agree with me about this. There were certain members of the Assembly and of the Senate at the time, historically, that we're talking about. There were so many veterans of the Second World War
Right.
that were part of that group. Al Burstein was one of them. Brendan Byrne was one of them. As somebody said to me, well, nobody can bother me very much because I've been shot at a lot, that when it was really serious. But they were considered kind of a new wave for the country. And of course, some have called them the greatest generation. I would definitely call Al Burstein the greatest generation. When I was counsel, well, first when I was a senator, so many people helped me in the shortest period of time, including the press corps, to try and figure out who was who and what was going on. And we were in the minority at that time, and David Goldberg was counsel with me, subsequently to the Senate. If you had a difficult bill, and of course, you all realize that there's so much of the executive branch is taking over how many bills are submitted that are supposed to be really serious bills. They bring a lot of clout. But who you get to pick or ask to, please, would you be the prime sponsor? Because number one, you have the intellectual capacity, you have the respect of your colleagues, you are able to chair any meeting of a committee or on the bill, as well as to present it in the caucus,
Right.
and have the respect of the speaker. Al Burstein was there always, as well as the fact of somebody with a highly educated sense of humor. And we had a good time together. Yeah. And he always understood consensus. I could only think of a few times when we did not have pretty much unanimous agreement. And there was one particular issue in which 3 of us, not including Al, we're okay with whatever the commission was doing on that particular matter. He was also, because of his legislative background and he was an excellent lawyer. The respect that the commissioners all gave to the public, and that is the part of also about this commission. Those meetings are open. If there were certain people that weren't there, like the League of Women Voters, I started to worry. Where are our regulars? And then they always had an opportunity. Whoever came always had an opportunity to speak. The only time we went into executive session was for matters of discipline, internal affairs for the governance of our own commission. And Al had such, well, I don't want to make him sound like he's the only one, because each of the commissioners that I served with had those skills, were very attentive to whatever was being said, not only by the staff. They reviewed all of the reports that came in to us, which obviously we got before every meeting. They had questions. Staff was always there to answer whatever questions we might have or adjust something. But by the time we were in session, we had something concrete to present to the public. And again, in those exchanges, he never hesitated to answer a question either at the chair's request or on his own motion. And again, that did not distinguish him all alone. I think that was how most of the commissioners always were. And everybody had so much experience about so many things. And then there were things about which none of us knew anything about. And boy, did we rely on you to say, please let us know what this is really about. Just to go back to the numbers, everybody should understand that there was also what was on the books and what was said to be the fine or the penalty or what have you. We engaged often from the enforcement group. Well, you have to understand this is not like the dog eating the homework. They didn't even have a dog. And they didn't know that they had to report, and his sister-in-law was the one who was supposed to do it, and she didn't know anything about it. And these were from the fire commissioner level up, where people were kind of dragooned into taking these positions. And I must say that the staff pretty much would guide us into, let's stay with what's important here. We'll send a letter of recommendation about how they can now report, and we'll help them through it. Even more critical, the thing I learned especially is that every phone call would be answered.
That's very important, absolutely.
Every phone call was answered by a real person and then directed to the right person. And at least during my tenure, that was always the case, and it's one in which I took away personally.
That's still the case. I mean, that's something that I insist on, that we have real people answering the phones. I think we're probably the only agency in state government that does that.
Well, they not only that, we may be the only ones. They may be the only ones that also people know what to do once they get the call. Oh, you mean you want to talk to X, Y, and Z? And I think that response, again, is very personal. It's, we're talking about citizens here.
Sure.
We're talking about a campaign staff. We're talking about somebody wants to talk with Joe. They're going to say, Joe, who's he? We know who Joe is. We'll find him at home if he won't answer here. But all of the personnel, to my knowledge, always responded with respect to whoever was calling up and saying, I don't know the answer. I'll get back to you. Or the commission is reviewing that at this period of time. There's going to be a public hearing about this on such and such a date. Here's where it is. That's where you park. We'll look forward to seeing you. Again, the commission's transparency. I don't think we even knew we were supposed to use those terms. But to have an open forum where people could come in and sometimes they were quite strange. I mean, some of the requests were strange. But it was a people's forum. It was also the case particularly for the gubernatorial elections.
Correct.
When we had a showcase of anybody could come in. The senators would come and watch. We would have people that were in charge of our budget there, watching, listening on all political stripes.
Let me pick up on something you just said in terms of transparency and the importance of transparency in the context of elections, in the context of regulating lobbyists and so forth, all the things we do. Very important, right?
I think that openness about your position is critical to a working democracy. Lobbyists, there's a national and international conversation going on here about should you know who's behind what? What is their position on this point? Is this something that is that will pass the straight face test? and that registrations are important. Failure to do so has consequences. It is also the reputation of whomever the lobbyist is representing that is at stake. Because if it is believed that the lobbyist misleads, that's not helping their client. And so, there's I think that gives, you should know who represents whom. And we all learn so much from lobbyists because nobody knows everybody about everybody's business, right?
Sure.
And so they often bring very, very good ideas and enhance the knowledge of whoever the deciders may be. That certainly helped me. And after a while, of course, I got a huge kick. I saw more of it when I was counsel to the governor. I mean, I never knew who it was up until then that insisted that we still have people pump our gas. I loved those people. And then the horse racing days. I mean, this was serious stuff. And I had no idea that they had a whole group of people that were going to make sure which days the races went off so that we could actually go to them and realize that this was a very, very complicated, syndicated approach to when these events would take place, along with all the other institutions, banking, insurance, commerce, liquor dealers. It is fascinating about what's going on now with the cannabis group. I think they're going to make more money than they budget by the time everybody's
I think you're right.
done with this.
It's a big business.
But again, this requires from your staff an understanding of what disclosure is important and not to overburden so that, you lose that information.
Yeah.
And that's something that your training must be on about all the time, which is the other part that we haven't talked about because there's consistent training going on all the time in that commission.
Yes.
And no silos.
Training and training of all the different groups and individuals that deal with our agency. We're constantly providing training programs.
How do you do that?
Well, normally we would do it in person, but during the pandemic, people like our computer staff and everything set up a webinar system that they could do. We did the training, remotely, so we didn't really lose any steps at all during that pandemic in terms of training. Those different entities and so forth and individuals that
Are you going to
deal with us.
You're going to continue to do that?
Oh, that's ongoing. I mean, we're going to start doing it in person again.
But I mean, continue the remote if it's required. Or it's
if
more
it's
efficient.
if
Maybe
it's
if it's
required.
more efficient,
Sure.
Depending upon the forum.
I think most people feel it's actually better in person, but we'll have that available to us in the event that somebody is asking for a training and needs to do it remotely. We can do it. We have that ability now as a result of this.
Well, I think everybody who's ever going to have to watch this should know that you all traveled up here to be with me. And I said, well, why don't we do this on Zoom? Or I could try and find you in Trenton someplace. And you said, oh, no, we want to come up. Frankly, I think you wanted to get out of the office. But however.
We always want to get out of the office.
Well, but there is something about being with somebody.
Absolutely.
And getting to know them, and also knowing that there is a trust level that is going on. Joe Donahue will appreciate the fact that all of the judicial appointments happened to be on my watch for the governor, as well as all the appointments that were in all of the agencies and commissions and whatever.
You know, we talked about very early on, I remember when I was actually interviewing for the position as executive director, we talked about increasing the profile, enhancing the profile of the agency. And, you know, I think with Joe's help and, you know, we're very open to the press, and I think we've done that. I think that's very important for an agency to have a high profile. It makes it more effective, I think, in terms of their accomplishments and
well, you know what
can be
and
done.
it probably gives to get completely out of what I should know anything about. I think it also gives the editors for whom the reporters
Right.
work a feeling that this is one that is on the level, that there is not going to be something that is that gives the newspaper a bad reputation
Right.
for, you know, shoddy information and all the things that can happen as a result of that. But I think that still takes two sides. It takes two sides. One of the things that probably bugs them, everybody, is that you only have written how many white papers?
Well, I know I wrote 20, and Joe has wrote a number of other ones. I forget the number that. I think it's a total of about 30, something like that.
And so tell me about what the purpose of those have been.
Well, it's to inform the public in terms of the various issues that are important to them, that have to do with campaign financing and lobbying and so forth. And so it's, you know, I think it's been something that's been well received by the public and by the press,
And not,
because we do keep them informed.
and not just at that level, but these are ones that you publish all over the country.
Right, exactly.
So you have ways to
Right.
do that and go to conventions, which you'll hopefully be able to continue to do. But I think to have an intellectual library, if you will,
We do.
of positions is invaluable. The archives are invaluable, but unless somebody's doing it,
Right.
it doesn't exist.
Which is really the purpose of what we're doing here today, is for archival purposes, right? We want in the future people to, you know, with this new video age and so forth, we want the history to be videoed and to talk to people like yourself about the commission, about the different issues and so forth. And that reminds me, I just want to say that we're talking with Jerry English, who is a former chairwoman of the Election Law Enforcement Commission. Again, thank you for sitting down with me.
Well, you know what? This is a great honor for me because it's kind of nice to be the history of something that has been not only successful, but endures and will continue to endure. But that would not happen unless the tone is always there from the top. Respect within all of the professionals, people, and that goes out to whether or not a democratic society, to get very global here, is successful. Every time we read that a country keeps the Fourth Estate from operating, keeps a silence system, keeps a censorship system, that does not enhance that entity. And so why do people look to the United States, for instance, and say, well, you've got some things that you don't do 100% well, but there are some things you do very well, and you work at it. And information flow that makes people feel that as a citizen, we also have responsibilities. Oh, this is what you expect. You expect us to want to participate in public life, even if it's through voting or signing up to some career situation or going, in fact, into public service as a career. becoming a journalist, becoming a historian, and having the integrity that goes with that. That's kind of the sort of thing that makes you say, boy, I can hardly wait to get up and go to work today.
Let me ask you a question about
Yes.
lobbying.
Yeah.
Of course, we regulate lobbyists, at the state level. But one of the recommendations that we've made, and legislation hasn't been enacted at this point, but we've recommended that lobbying at the local level be covered and disclosed and regulated. How do you feel about that?
And who is supposed to be doing that?
Well,
Who is supposed to be regulating that?
we would. I mean, they would be disclosing their activities, their how much money. The same thing that we have at the state level with regard to their activities would be disclosed, and how much money is spent at the local level would all be disclosed to the Election Law Enforcement Commission. They have that in other states, and it's something we don't have in New Jersey.
And why do you think it's needed?
Well, I think there's I'm sure you must agree that there's a lot of lobbying that goes on at the local level that we're missing, that the public is not apprised of. And I think it's important for the public to have that kind of information.
So
because you're talking about budgeting,
the lobbyist doesn't have a red badge
right,
at the local level,
right,
to use our old-fashioned
Exactly.
way of doing it. There's no
Exactly.
red badge. They stand up and they make in the public session, stand up and make a statement about something, and just viewed as, well, you're just a member of the public here. You have no axe to grind professionally or financially. And you don't need to say, I represent X,
right.
is it, other than, I'm here independently. I think that to the extent that, to put it to its grimmest way, it may be one of the best ways to avert corruption within any community's governance, because the eyes are on it about who is this person, what are they representing, what are they saying if it's true, but without the rest of it, which is a press corps that is there to report this, and having minutes of these kinds of meetings. And then today they can be out in any public forum,
Right.
because individual towns will say, here's our town hall, this is what went on, and somebody stands up and does not represent themselves well, about, candidly, to say, this is who I represent.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a paid lobbyist, I've got this red badge on. They just say, oh, well, I'm concerned about so-and-so. And this company really has a good reputation. And of course, he's often at the rallies of X, and his spouse, her spouse, is always a volunteer as such. We can make all this stuff up. At the end of it, it is a paid position. It has nothing to do, potentially, with whether or not the lobbyist really says, that's what I think too. This is my job. I'm here as a professional person. This is
Sure.
my job. This is who I represent. I don't take that away. If you stand up, say who you are, who you represent, what your interest is, then that is public. It's the one that you don't know about that poses the problem.
Behind the scenes type
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Now, another thing that I wanted to ask you as well, because of your having been a state senator and having, worked for the state senate and having worked with the legislature when you were with Governor Byrne and so forth, and it really goes back to I guess it was 1981, where the Attorney General at that time, Erwin Kimmelman, had recommended consolidating all of the regulation of lobbying in the Election Law Enforcement Commission. Because before that, the Attorney General was responsible for the quarterly reporting, their actual activities, and the election law enforcement was concerned with the annual financial aspect of lobbying. And the Attorney General in a report made a very, very good recommendation. Why don't you just consolidate all of this in ELEC? You know, we have a lot of things to do over here. We've got organized crime and we've drugs and so on and so forth, really, these major issues. Let's put it all in the Election Law Enforcement Commission. And the legislature at that time, you know, a lot of them got up, yeah, that's a really great idea and so forth. But, you know, it took 13 years for legislation to be enacted to actually do that. Now, maybe you could talk about why does it take so long sometimes for something that just seems so obvious to move through the legislature?
Well, there's always vested interests to say, oh, you mean to say you want to know about that? Well, we don't think that's such a hot idea. Sometimes, you know, too much sunshine is very scary. And so what was they used to call it, you know, government under glass? Let the sun shine in. However, it's very legitimate to have a concern that there be a skill set within any such agency. To do that, I mean, you know, you have to have the right people there that you can hire that can be your employees to say, I understand what's going on, for it to be legitimate. If it's just a showcase without real enforcement, without real understanding about what's going on, then that requires professional status, I think. And so the extent to which the agency, the ELEC, was able to attract people to be public servants in that stead and have the right background, are capable of course, learning. Everybody's learning on the job from the first day, right?
Sure.
But is capable of learning and then showing competence on a regular basis so that it becomes respected. That may take time. And I'm not sure on the first day it was proposed that staffing was there. Maybe, maybe not. But I think in order to be credible, that has to be anticipated and it has to be in the budget.
So very often with legislation, there's no appropriation that goes along with it.
You know what? Then that becomes the fool's errand.
Right.
And the commissioners that don't stand up and say that, or the front office that says, wait a minute, governor's not going to sign that bill. Where is it in there? That becomes part of the legislative process.
Sure.
And that becomes part of, well, wait a minute, how are we going to pay for this? Now that's a legitimate question.
Right.
And in order to attract the level of expertise that I am talking about, there's already, for all public servants, there's already a decision made for their careers of why they want to be a public servant. But they don't have to also have a begging cup. And so to attract the kind of people that have the background and the passion, I kind of like that word because I think it's consistent with good governance.
Sure, absolutely.
That does not mean that you carry your own, your own opinions to everything, because that's not your job. The job is to review it professionally, to set forth what is good, set forth what the detriments to it are, and then convince the governing body that you serve that whatever position you're taking on something has been researched, has been, due diligence has been done, because it's those people that the board of directors, so to speak, have to rely upon. And if they don't have that, then bad decisions are going to be made. And I assure you, the press corps is going to notice. That will be the next headline, especially if malfeasance is taking place, and it's not picked up like that.
Yeah. Also, during your tenure as chairwoman of the commission, number of different things. One of the different programs were enacted. One of them was a fair and clean elections program, and that was a program to provide public funds to candidates for the legislature. And the program started in 2005 with 2 districts, and then in the next gubernatorial election, 2007, it was 3 districts that they expanded to. It was basically a pilot program where candidates would raise money in $10 denominations, and then they would get funded by public funds. I think it was up to $100,000 or something like that.
Okay.
That program, how did you feel about that? Because we had to really implement it as a commission, and it had a good purpose. The intent was really good, but somehow, and ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a similar case in Arizona, said that the purpose of it to level the playing field was unconstitutional, which then made our program unconstitutional. But did you have any thoughts about the fair and open public funding program?
If it could be done, again, you can't do it unless you say we can match. That comes out of the public coffers.
That's where I was going next, because we have a matching program for the gubernatorial.
We have a matching program. Without the funds that's in the budget, then it remains a very nice idea, and it's one that of course could encourage all sorts of really good people to come to agree to the tumult of political life. And then, more important, it's one thing to get elected, it's another thing to govern. And so the 3 branches working together are in that business of credibility, of once elected, can you govern, and are you working in the public interest?
Yeah, so we did have this clean elections, which it didn't really work out as well as a lot of people thought it was going to. But
in truth, what did you find that really just didn't work?
Well,
was the candidates? Was it the campaigns? Was it?
Well, ironically, I think it was very difficult to raise money in $10 and to raise enough money to meet the threshold to get that $100,000 to run for the assembly or for
So it
Senate.
started off at $10?
Yeah, it was $10 denominations that was the limit that people could raise.
Limit.
And so they thought that they were going to be able to raise, enough $10 to meet a threshold amount.
Well,
which it didn't really work.
I'd have to just say that today that would get you 1.5 gallons of gasoline. Right?
It worked. It worked in Maine, and it worked in where was it? I guess in Arizona, and actually then Joe Roberts, who was the Speaker of the Assembly, he and some other people had gone up to Maine to observe their program and came back, thinking that this could work in New Jersey. And I did interview former Speaker Roberts, and he kind of acknowledged that, probably maybe a matching program would have been the better approach, like our gubernatorial, but it did work in these other places, and they wanted to try it in New Jersey.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try,
Right.
okay?
Right.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't try in a democracy. If you try something with good intent, and then it turns out to show its flaws, that doesn't keep it from happening again. but again, that's
Well, you learn from it. You learn
from it,
right.
and then there will be someone that joins the Senate, that joins the Assembly, and say, "I really followed this a long time, and you'll help me with where any corporation can give whatever it wants came into view," and that changed the landscape. So I don't know where these programs were.
Well, I mean, you're talking about 2005 when the Fair and Clean Elections program went into effect,
But where was Countrywide?
and you were
When was the Supreme Court saying that a corporation could give as much money as it wanted?
oh, that was in 2010. That was
All right, so this is before that period of time.
that was before that period of time. So,
So,
but also,
yeah,
it's always been my contention that what you're talking about is independent expenditures
right.
groups that, there's no contribution limit, contributions going into it, and they can spend as much money as they want to on the election. They're not regulated at all. I've always maintained that the real start of that was the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, because between 2002 and Citizens United in 2010, there was about 1,000% increase in the number of these groups, these independent groups that came about. So that's when it really took off, and then Citizens United facilitated that growth of these independent expenditures. But that was another area that we've been talking about.
Well, but it's also transformative. It's transformative of again, how expensive campaigns are now, the reach of campaigns, and at that point, although again I'm talking about something that is ephemeral to me, but that's the role now of social media. So there's counterbalancing in many ways that is much more personal and sometimes extremely effective. But that didn't exist during these periods of time that we're talking about. So our basic conversation is, why is there so much money involved in this public process? What about it just doesn't smell right? I mean, that's a technical term.
Sure. Well, I think, as you probably know, and you kind of you still follow what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been one of the things that we've been talking about, is at least getting disclosure of these independent groups. So at least put them on par with candidates and political parties. I mean, both political parties and candidates have
I
to
have no problem with that.
disclose their activities. Independent expenditures don't.
Well, you know what?
Under most circumstances.
Again, we go back to the sunshine,
Yeah, right.
and that is what poses. That spotlight. I suppose somebody going to jail 2 or 3 times might also, heighten somebody's interest. But the whole point of it is in a society that considers itself democratic, and that every person's got a right to a functioning government that respects the individual, that understands the role of all of the societal needs that we have, is a balance.
Right. Sure.
But at the end of it, we still come down to, what is the reputation of this entity or of this process? And when it fails, even though it might have been good to begin with, we get lessons from it. Doesn't mean you don't try it again. You don't say, wait a minute, something's out of balance here. If it's out of balance and it restricts other voices that are just as important, but do not have the ability to be heard, because either they can't pay to be heard, or that they do not attract spokespeople on their behalf that are competent and are, and are just kind of, sounds so corny to just say they're good citizens to start with.
Sure, sure. Another initiative that occurred during your tenure as chairwoman was the pay-to-play law. Basically that's to kind of connect the dots between a contribution that's made by a public contractor and the contract. And of course that plays right into the importance of disclosure in terms of getting disclosure of these of contributions in return for a contract. Problem is that, as we see it, that the law was so complicated that it's so very difficult to enforce because you have a number of exceptions to the law, such as the fair and open provision, and local governments can have their own ordinances. So then there's exemptions to the law. So it's very hard to enforce, and at the same time, it's hard to comply with. So we've proposed as a commission that there be one state law that applies to everybody. I mean, is that something you can support?
Sure.
Yeah.
Again, if the staff within ELEC is then, again, competent to oversee it, to understand when it seems like it's off, when there is, again, I keep going back to an active press corps, to people who actually go to the town meetings and sit there, and while most of it is boring, and then suddenly somebody, the commission had probably one of its first tests about pay-to-play, and substantial fines and settlements and penalties, and I think that one was headed in the criminal direction. So that's within the purview of the Attorney General, because again, ELEC does not have criminal jurisdiction.
Right.
And that is actually, from my point of view, appropriate, because the Attorney General, who has jurisdiction over the entire government, sees things coming in from different directions, has a different kind of staff, has people who are, they're accomplished in the economics, they look at financial statements, they have independent counsel, they remove it from the parochial, and all of those things that are in any town.
Right, exactly.
Any town, any county, any authority, any place where there is substantial monies that are public money, and they're paying to do certain kind of work, but did somebody else benefit as a result of that contract, that it was not in the public view? That's, I think, where you have that intersection.
Right, I think you're right, absolutely. Well, I think we're coming to the conclusion of our interview with Jerry English, former chairwoman of the Election Law Enforcement Commission. So I think I'd just like to end. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to us?
I hope that you see this gavel.
It looks familiar.
And it was it was a little scary to kind of say, oh, whoa. And you may recall that's something that Joe Donahue won't remember at all. When I was asked what I wanted to be called, and it was always chairwoman or chairman, I just said chair.
That's right. I beg your pardon because I've been calling you chairwoman.
I was just the chair, and it never occurred to me that somebody could just sit there and say, well, there's a chair. And I can't imagine what it was that made me say, no, you just call me chair. But I don't want to conclude this without saying, if you think I'm not paying attention to you, still, I'm paying close attention. It's much harder for anyone who is not there all the time in today's society of information flow to be as well informed, I think, as we used to be, because that reporting group is so diminished. The sophistication and the knowledge and the specialties that the reporting group developed, and often because of a good relationship with a reporting group, you start to hear about the other side of things, some of which is not so attractive. It could show up in someone's headline, or it could be because you have a respectful relationship of information, not confidential material. I'm talking about what's on the street, what everybody knows. How come you don't know it, Chair? You'd be surprised how much I don't know about. I'm amazed every day. But as you have these really, I think, excellent public servants as commissioners, they've seen a lot. They know a lot. They bring another whole basis for information and competent governance. And that sustains an independent agency.
Yeah,
I think without that, somebody that wants to destroy an independent agency knows how to do that. Unless, of course, that agency has a background of competence, being straightforward, being open to the public, a staff that knows its business and is responsive to the public is essential to survive. Mm-hmm. So anytime you need me to go down and yell at somebody in the legislature, give me a call.
That sounds good.
Thank you so much for coming all the way to Summit, New Jersey.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for your insightful comments. Very, very, very helpful, I think, to everybody and to the citizens of New Jersey. And again, I've been speaking with Jerry English, who's a former chairwoman of the Election Law Enforcement Commission and also Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection. So thank you very much. It's been great seeing you, and it's been great having this conversation.
Anytime.